A lot of you guys ask me, is it realistic for you to get to the level of 1500, 2000, or even a master level if you are an adult improver? And I decided to answer that question. I'm a grandmaster myself, I've been coaching over the last 20 years roughly, and I want to address 5 particular things which I think are very important to understand if you want to get to those chess goals. Let's begin with the most ambitious goal. Can you become a grandmaster or an international master? I've got bad news and good news here. There's pretty solid data that suggests that in order to get to those most ambitious goals, it is very desirable to begin learning chess before the age of 12. Because after that you discover girls or boys and then it's game over. But jokes aside, it is pretty consistent across different researches. Now, that is rather bad news, but there's also good news. Here's a message that I got from one of you guys. He shares the same name actually. He's also Igor from Denmark. He learned chess at the age of 16, played the first tournaments at 17, and at 27 became an international master. Here's another good news. If we lower the bar and talk about achieving the level of 2000 in chess, then you can see that whether you started below or above 12 is not critical at all, and this is a goal that is ambitious and yet realistic for the majority of chess players. In fact, we can scroll down to the comment section of pretty much every video on this channel and you will see plenty of stories from people who improved their chess by hundreds of rating points, and most of my audience is adults. Another more challenging and yet still realistic goal to achieve is to become a national master. In most countries, US included, the rating barrier for that is 2200. We're talking about all of the war games, and there are quite a few people who did that. Finally, the BM title is always there to be claimed. Oh! Neuroscience tells a similar story in foreign language learning. It states that native-like grammar is almost unattainable if you start after 10, although high fluency is still possible. And of course, this is not a direct analogy, but to some extent, I guess it is applicable. It means that the highest accomplishments are probably impossible if you start after the age of 10 to 12, but you can get very, very good despite starting late. Actually, I guess I'm an example of that. I learned English when I was about 20, and yet my command of English is decent enough to trick non-native speakers to believe that I am a native speaker. How about cognitive decline and aging? Professional players peak around the age of 35 and then very, very gradually decline, which makes some players upset and others happy.
Magnus Carlsen about to be knocked down from the championship bracket here.
Come on!
Garry Kasparov retired at 42, and that was probably a smart move. How about casual players? Actually, things are not too bad here. Yes, there is a steady cognitive decline since the age of 45, and that is unfortunate. However, that decline is actually very, very gradual, and playing chess actually helps you to keep your brain active. For example, studies of elderly people found out that participants who frequently played board games, including chess, had about a 74% lower risk of dementia, and those doing crossword puzzles had only around a 38% lower risk, so crosswords are officially checkmated. And of course, nothing stops you from learning chess and progressing at any age. Here's a message that I was really happy to see from James, who wanted to get that Michigan champion trophy for 30 years. Just think about that, that's crazy. And he finally got it at the age of 44. And just like all of us, he's a busy guy, he's got his day job, he authored a couple books, he also helped me to proofread my book when I wanted to write it. And it just goes to show that you can progress at chess even if you're busy, if you just continuously learn and improve. Let me also talk about the other side of the equation. There is a common stereotype that kids absorb skills naturally and quickly and easily. Here's the problem. I'm a coach who actually have taught a lot of kids chess, and I can tell you that I can teach rules of chess to an adult in one go, in one session. For a 4-year-old, it takes a few weeks to get the same outcome. And I have to spend time answering questions such as, why do you call these pieces white if they're not white? And explaining that no, bishop does not look like an ice cream, you should not lick it. Also, even outside of chess, if you talk to teachers and parents, they'll tell you all sort of things that this is TikTok generation, they have no patience, no focus, etc, etc. Moreover, I've seen this figure which is mind-boggling, that 27.7% of US children have been diagnosed with ADHD and various disorders in 2021. I mean, I'm not sure if it's true, but there are definitely certain challenges with coaching kids. And yet it is true that kids typically progress at a much faster rate compared to adults, especially up to the age of 20. And I'm one of those kids. I became an international master when I was 13 and became a grandmaster at 20. Now, there are, I would say, two pretty obvious factors. One factor is that simply as a kid, you don't have a kid, job responsibilities, and if an adult spends 4 hours a week on chess, and as a kid I can spend 40 hours a week, then obviously that is 10x more time. But I think that's not even the main factor. The main differentiator is the fact that kids often have guidance, they have coaches, and adults usually don't. Which brings us to the next stereotype. Practice makes perfect. Sometimes on chess forums, you'll see people saying that you just need to play more, solve more puzzles, and you'll eventually get better. And I would say that unfortunately it is not true. I know plenty of chess players who've been stagnating for years, if not decades, with no improvement despite playing thousands of chess games. Think about this. If you're playing bullet chess at 1 a.m., technically you are practicing chess, right? But if you practice blunders, you'll end up with perfect blunders. Now let's talk about puzzles. There's again that common perception that you just need to make lots and lots of tactical puzzles and you will see them and use them in your own games easily. Such as in this position is black to play and you can try it out for a couple seconds. Indeed, if you're an experienced player, then you do know that there is such a pattern as a back rank checkmate. And you start looking for those moves, and if you see that the knight is guarding that square, you may get an idea to try to do that with a queen, which is a great move, deflects the knight, and then you finish the game with this back rank checkmate. Yes, tactical patterns are important, but besides that, there are also positional patterns which get a lot less attention, even though they're equally important. For example, in this position, how about black playing pawn to c5? For a beginner player, this move seems very nice. You attack the queen, push it back, gain a tempo, feels cool, right? But a more advanced player knows this pattern called weak squares and backward pawn. And an advanced player understands right away that this is a bad idea because white's got this great square for his knight, and that backward pawn will be a long-term issue for black, and white will be putting pressure there. The bishop will be great at this diagonal of this position, and therefore this is a positional pattern that applies to this or any other similar position. And now let's get to real chess situations. This is a game from Capablanca. Simon Capablanca is playing white, and this is what you actually face most of the time when you play chess. There is no combination, you cannot sacrifice a piece, there's no clear positional pattern, there's no weak square to put your knight on, or there is no open file to put your rook on. You just need to make a decision. And that is what I think is the most important thing. I call these rules of thinking. These are sort of decision-making frameworks for chess. A combination of those algorithms, like if-then, that you've got in your brain, that you practiced, and now you just know that that is how you play chess. For example, here, if it's white to move, how should you play? Like, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that, and then I'll tell you what a master chess player typically thinks about. Now, in an opening, you need to finalize your development, right? Develop pieces and castle. Right? Therefore, the first thing that comes to mind is that you need to develop this bishop. And therefore, you check these squares. Okay, you'll see that this square is controlled by black. This square is also controlled, right? These two. And therefore, Capablanca just played bishop d2. See, it's very simple. Black continued with knight to d7. What do you do then? Again, for a beginner player, that is total chaos because white can play whatever, absolutely any move. A chess master knows that once your opening is finished, there are basically two approaches. First is begin your attack, go forward, create threats, and the second one is also develop your queen and rooks. And Capablanca probably did not see a clear path to do that, even though, you can play like queen e2, queen c2, rook e1, that is absolutely possible. Capablanca chose the first approach, go forward, create threats, he pushed f4. And his opponent indeed started to panic, traded off the bishop, and then played rook e8. Now it is white to move again. What do you do here? Again, one of the two. Either go forward and create threats, or complete your development, activate your queen and rooks, and he played rook to e1. You see, it's the same pattern. Black goes knight to f6. Should you take or not? Now, if you've been a part of the Igor Nation for a while, then you know that to take is a mistake. Therefore, again, for a beginner player, it's very natural to take whenever there is an opportunity. For a more advanced player, you know that to take is a mistake. You also know that in the middle game, once again, you should look forward to opponent's side of the board, move there, and create threats. And Capablanca went knight to g5. You see, there's not that much of calculation, visualization, tactical patterns. You just follow those decision-making frameworks, or rules of thinking as I call them. Now black goes h6, kicking the knight. What do you do here? Again, for a lot of players, if they see that the knight is attacked, they just think, okay, I'm going to retreat it. And it's certainly much better than blundering the knight right here. However, a strong player also knows, once again, the same framework. In a middle game, it's time to attack, go forward on opponent's side of the board, create threats. And when there is an opportunity, you should start looking for forced moves. Checks, captures, attack, and moves. And here, an advanced player would first consider one of these two moves, and only if none of them work, will then retreat the knight somewhere. Right? So that's the way of thinking. And Capablanca goes knight takes f7, which is a nice move, but it's also quite clear that there's a very high likelihood that there is something here, because you see that the king likes defenders. There's basically just only this single knight around the king right away, and white, on the other hand, has all his pieces pointing towards the king side, right? He's got a lot of pressure right here, which is a clear indicator that there's a great chance that your attack is going to be successful. Therefore, again, even without much calculation, you see that it's probably a good idea to sacrifice your knight right here, which Capablanca did. Knight takes, now queen takes. Actually, black cannot take, and he didn't, because here after queen takes e6, white just wins with bishop c4, bishop g6 probably, and then queen to f7 checkmate is unavoidable, so black did not even capture the knight. He retreated the queen here, not here, finally to c7. Capablanca took the pawn, and black played rook bishop to f8, activating the rook. All right, what do you do here? Now, theoretically, you got to calculate variations, etc., and it's all true. But fundamentally, again, you see that there is a nice theme, right? The king is pretty exposed. You already grabbed a couple pawns, which already goes to show that your attack is a good idea. And if nothing works, let's say the rook hits your queen, you just retreat the queen and you'd be fine somewhere here. Right, but here, knight takes h6 is a double attack. And yes, if you know that tactical pattern, it is easier to find it. It's true. Now the king goes, and what do you do here? Actually, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about this. But I would say one more time that, yes, knowing tactical patterns makes it far easier for you to find the following move. But a strong player would go for this position regardless of whether he sees the continuation or not. Because, again, it just feels that since you have so many attackers pointing towards the king side, you've completed your development, it is time to attack, and the king likes defenders. All that indicates to a strong player that it should be successful for white. And even if there is no combination, and white would just retreat the queen from these dangers somewhere here, going inside, and, even sacrifice the knight, it is still probably good for white. You can continue with something like rook e5 maybe, or like g4, g5, and then as the knight moves, you'll continue with queen h7 checkmate, and white would still probably win. Therefore, just your understanding still helps you find good moves, even with no calculation, no visualization, and no tactical patterns involved. But of course here, if you do know tactical patterns, that's even nicer, because Capablanca played queen to g8, which is very nice, mother checkmate. And I find it to be very inspirational that fundamentally chess is not about memorization or about calculation, but about these rules of thinking which are available to you at any age. And that is why there are some players who became even national masters at their 70s. And if you want my help in learning and practicing these things, I've got a special bundle called Boost Your ELO to 2000. You can find it by clicking the link below the video. And by now you know why the goal is 2000, because it is that ambitious and yet achievable goal for most chess players. Also, let me know if that story and everything that I shared resonates with you or not, or if you had any different experience, or if you have any other questions, and I'll talk to you soon.